Good afternoon. My name is Griffin Dietrich, and I'm the treasurer of the Allegany Arts Council. And I want to welcome you to an afternoon with Michael Snyder. We're here today to discuss Michael's passion project, Mountain Traditions, Stories of Appalachian Traditions in Our Rapidly Changing World. This project will be on display at the Allegany Arts Council from June 2nd through June 13th. It's a limited exhibit, shorter than most of our other exhibits, so make sure to mark your calendar to get in to see this tremendous event. Before we get started in discussing the project, I want to give just a brief background on Michael, if I could. Michael is a photographer, filmmaker, and environmental scientist who uses his combined knowledge of visual storytelling and conservation to create narratives that drive social change. Through his production company, Interdependent Pictures, he has directed films in the Arctic, the Amazon, the Himalayas, and East Africa. His journalism work has been featured by numerous outlets, and his films have been selected to over 50 festivals and have taken home numerous awards. He is a climate journalism fellow at the Bertha Foundation, and he holds an MSc in environmental sustainability from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. He also has a BSc from Dickinson College. Originally from Frostburg, Michael has lived around the world, including long-term stints in Scotland, Japan, Hawaii, and New Zealand. He currently resides in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia with his wife and 2 children. Michael, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So I wanted to, before we get into the Mountain Traditions project, I want to talk a little bit about your upbringing. You grew up in Frostburg. I think we're about the same age, in the 80s, 90s timeframe. Talk a little bit about your upbringing there and kind of some of the influences that growing up in this area had on you as a person, you as an artist.
Yeah, so we moved here when I was 5, and I have 3 younger siblings, and we all lived in this big house down in this little mining community just outside of Frostburg. And so, you know, we spent most of our childhood in the woods. I mean, that was really my first home, I feel, was as much in the house and as much as it was out in the woods with my siblings. And I think for me, in a lot of ways, that had a profound impact that sort of has been opening up over the years, and I see more and more how that affected me. But it definitely led me to want to pursue a career in the woods. And for me, that started out doing wilderness training, essentially, for people. But over time, as I was doing that, I came to see more and more that it's not enough to get out there and explore these places. We've got a responsibility to share and protect that for future generations. So that's what really led me to study environmental sustainability. But I really, every time I come back here and I feel like I'm coming back home, I'm reminded of that connection to the land. And I think that's really what gave rise to that passion. It all kind of started here.
Yeah. Do you recall whenever you were growing up when you first realized maybe this is what you wanted to do as a career in terms of being an artist and filmmaker and photographer?
Well, first of all, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I still don't know if I do. I think it's always evolving and changing. And in a lot of ways, what I'm doing now is in service of inner values rather than a sort of an end in itself. But when I was a kid, my dad was a photographer, and he taught me, essentially. Okay. And I loved it. I mean, I was always the kid with the camera in high school and in college. So to a certain extent, there's a precedent here, and there is a background. But I just never imagined it would be a full-time thing. I never thought that would be the case. And the way that came to pass is I was working in environmental issues, and I think more and more I came to realize that we already have so much of the science and the technology and the policy that we need to make a transition towards a more sustainable world. I really think more often than not, we're not doing enough with that stuff. And I just got really interested in the power of narrative and of storytelling. And it's when I started to move into that space that I remembered all these tools and skills that I got from my family, which really, in a lot of ways, are a long line of storytellers in various different ways. So, I really, even though I've been a photographer and filmmaker now, a storyteller of sorts for over 10 years as a full-time thing, for me, it's really in service of my greater passions about environmental issues and culture, particularly of this area. I do a lot of work here, and social issues as well.
Interesting. I was going to ask you if you had any artists in the family. It's a common theme of people that gets passed down from generation to generation, which is kind of a theme of some of the work you've been doing. Okay, you grow up here, you're in Frostburg. Your first move out, is it Dickinson College? Is that where you got your undergrad?
It is, yeah.
What was that experience like?
Well, it was completely eye-opening for me. I mean, even though growing up here, I was surrounded by books. I feel very lucky for that, and we did travel some as kids. But when you grow up in Appalachia, I mean, the end of my world was the mountains around my home.
Right.
And I just experientially, that's where I thought the world ended. And I thought everyone essentially sort of looked like me and thought like me. And even though going away to college was only going 2.5 hours away,
Yeah.
it was just an entirely different world of people and experiences. And I think for me, it really opened up a door that had long been there, but that I want to get out and see more and explore more.
Sure.
So that experience, of course, and then also I studied abroad when I was there, and it really gave me a commitment to getting out into the world. And I spent a lot of my 20s away.
Yeah.
It wasn't really into my 30s that I started coming back to my home here in the hills.
I read on your website you've spent time in, make sure I get this right, Scotland, Japan, Hawaii, and New Zealand. Tell us a little bit about having come from Appalachia and now kind of getting out and seeing the world and seeing different experiences, how that kind of shaped you, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, a few different things. I think one, I mean, I've always loved where I'm from. I knew when I was growing up that I loved this place and I cherished this place. And when I left, in some ways it was hard to leave. I was just talking to my mom about this the other day when I graduated high school, that I was weeping, but to leave, but not because because I didn't want to go, but because I'd had such an amazing time here. So I even though I was eager to get out in the world, I was never a thing where I felt like I needed to escape. But I do have to say, I really do think in spending a lot of time away, it actually really clarified how much I do value this place.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can see it more clearly now, and warts and all. That
Sure.
doesn't mean that it's a perfect place. It isn't.
Sure.
It doesn't mean we don't have a lot of ways to grow. It was never perfect, but it is an incredibly beautiful place, and
Yes.
it does have incredibly wonderful people. And so I think being away really helped me see that.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways. But I also think being away really helped me solidify for me my interest in the ways in which people are incredibly different, but also this overlap that we have, the ways that we're similar, and how we find common ground despite our differences. And that's a major feature of this project as well,
Mm-hmm.
is sort of celebrating differences, but also looking for the ways that we connect.
Yeah.
So I think being abroad also really helped with that.
Yeah, I found, when I moved away and came back, you gain an appreciation for some of the things this area offers that you don't necessarily appreciate it. That's kind of your only perspective. So I definitely can relate to that. I felt the same way. I didn't get to travel as much as you did, but even just being away and seeing how other people kind of live, it really broadens your perspective. I think I'd encourage everybody who can to try and do that at least at some point in their life. What's your favorite thing now that you've gone away and moved back? Just curious, what is your favorite thing about living in Appalachia, kind of in a similar town to where you grew up? And what's one thing maybe you'd like to change if you could? You had a magic wand.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, my favorite thing, I think it's really two things. And one is, it is incredibly beautiful and special. And when you go around other places in the world, there's just very few places that have this endless hardwood forest, on these mountains. I mean, there are other places in the world, but it's not that many places. I mean, this is actually a really, really special environment. And so I think that's the first thing. Just one is the raw natural beauty. But the other thing is, when we were living in DC for a number of years, my wife and I would always, talk that we drive out here to come out and visit family, and you go over Sidling Hill, and we could just feel the pressure come off, and I think that's one of these things that's hard to put a finger on about this place, but there's something that's just at a different pace, and
Sure.
I just think you really feel that when you're here. So those are wonderful things, and I think those are things that I hope never change about this place.
Right.
In terms of what I would change, I mean, I think this is happening. And I think this is a dialogue that's ongoing, and there's no right answer to this. And again, it's kind of a core focus of this project. But it's how do we hold on to these things that we value, whether it's our way of life, or whether it's our traditions, or the art forms that are native to here. How do we keep those while also opening up to the outside world?
Sure.
And I think the latter part is essential.
Agreed.
I think not only is that being opened up anyway by virtue of things like the internet and our economy, but there's a lot of benefits to doing that too. And maybe it means letting go of some things,
Sure.
and allowing some things to change. But there's a tension there, and I think it's for everyone to figure out, and collectively for us to figure out here. How do we open up as best as we can while still, remaining who we are?
Sure. Great. Is your wife from this area as well?
She's not at all.
Okay. So how does she like being in Appalachia with you?
It's funny. So when I was in Edinburgh, I was studying there. I met my wife. She's from the far northwest of England. Okay. And we always comment that her hometown is essentially the Cumberland of England. Like, okay. They are incredibly parallel.
Interesting.
So there's actually a lot of things that are very, very similar about where she's from and where I'm from, that she actually feels home here too. Mm-hmm. But of course, every time she goes into the supermarket, we get every comment under the sun about what accent she has.
Right.
Is that Australia? Is that New Zealand? Are you from Russia? I mean, literally, it's all over the place.
Sure.
But no, she loves it here too. And I think she's really felt at home in a lot of ways being here as well.
Cool. I want to move on to some of the work you do with your company, Interdependent Pictures. I was reading on your website that you're all over the place shooting films and doing all kind of work in documentaries. What's some of the work that inspires you that you want to produce with Interdependent Pictures? And can you talk a little about the work you do through that?
Yeah. So that production company, which I started back in 2010, 2011, and actually got to start here in a lot of ways. It's really set up to partner with nonprofit organizations, universities that are working on environmental or social justice issues or cultural issues, and to help them tell their stories. The goal is to really help elevate that work. And I've been really blessed that it's also taken me to a lot of different places around the world, and that's been really exciting, and kind of selfishly has been a major perk. But to your question about what sort of inspires me or what I want to do with it, I hope in some ways that by taking those stories and making films out of them, that it's helping to drive the impact of the work that they're doing. I mean, that's really the why, essentially. But it's also really exciting to get to go to some of these places. And I felt very lucky. I was most recently, I was on an expedition to the Arctic during the polar night. So the 4 months of the year during winter where the sun doesn't rise. And we were, at the time of filming, we were the northernmost people on the planet.
Wow.
And I just remember, being out in this little dinghy on this frozen ocean and just being this incredible sense of being blessed to be able to do this work too. So it's been a really exciting thing to do. But the greatest inspiration has been the people and the organizations that I've worked with.
Sure. We were talking a little bit before we were rolling about the documentaries you do. What do you, when you decide to do a new project, what are some of the things you look for before you decide to invest all the time, money, and research into doing it? There's certain key topics you're looking to explore?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things. I mean, one is that, for a documentary film, there's got to be a story, right? And there's a big difference between a topic and a story.
Sure.
You can, write about a topic, but if you're going to make a film, you really need a story, right? And so that means that there's stakes. It means there's somebody that wants something, that is willing to go out of their way to get it. It might be transformed by doing that. So I always look for what's a compelling story. And part of that is one of the reasons for making this is we get outside of the box on the conversation. Right? If we're just making a piece about, say, climate science, right, but it's made and it's all about the science, well, the scientists will like it, right? But if our goal is to broaden the circle and engage, a bigger community to be able to have a better dialogue about this, then we need to make media that's engaging and interesting. And part of the way to do that is with story.
Sure.
So I'm always looking at sort of pushing that outwards. Not that you need to reach everybody, but we need to get better about reaching more people with these stories.
Sure.
So I always think in that way.
Makes sense. I read also you were a climate journalism fellow at the Bertha Foundation. Could you describe that for us a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah. So I'm actually with them just now, and I'm working on a project about sea level rise in the Chesapeake Bay. And what I've actually just come back from that trip. I was there just last week, and I was profiling 40 different individuals around the bay, and hopefully a pretty diverse group. And asking them, you guys all care about climate change. Each one of the people I was talking to, they've already sort of self-identified as caring about it. But why? Why? And we had a waterman, we had a hunter, we had a politician, we had several faith leaders. And part of the goal there was what I was talking, with you about earlier, is that even though we have these very different life ways and these very different paths in life, maybe there's some areas that we have some overlap in our values too. And if we can map those overlaps, maybe we can start to come together to talk about how we care for this resource and what we're going to do about it.
Sure.
So it's been a really exciting year. I've been with them for the past year with Bertha, and they're a journalism organization based in Britain. And hopefully we'll be rolling that work out over this summer. And then, as time goes on, partnering with the organizations that I met in the region there to help drive more conversations, education and outreach, and really handing the content over so that it lives out on its own.
Sure, fantastic. So let's move into the Mountain Traditions Project here. I'm going to pull up a quote on screen, give a tagline about what the project is about. Appalachia, a region often synonymous with tradition, is changing faster than any time in recent history, and perhaps faster than anywhere else in America. The Mountain Traditions Project tells the stories of individuals carrying forward Appalachian traditions in our rapidly changing world, and explores culture as a dynamic force, challenging a long-held notions of cultural rigidity in Appalachia. So, what prompted this project initially?
Well, it's a few different things. Part of it is circumstance. I was living in the UK, as I mentioned, for a number of years, and I came back home and I was waiting for my wife to finish up her PhD, and so I was here. That's where I always come back to, and just happened to sort of walk into a grant that had just come through the Appalachian Independent newspaper, and sponsored by the Community Trust Fund here, and Mountain City Traditional Arts. And to document some traditions in the area. And we did 5. This was back in 2010, 2011. And so that's how it got started. But what happened was we found out, like years later, essentially, I was sort of looking up some of the videos that we made. And we had a great release and the community liked them, but I had no intention it was going to go further. I ended up looking online, and these little videos we made had over 1 million views. And in the meanwhile, these things had sort of gone out there, and folks all around the country were seeing these things. And I believe some of the photos and the content were being used as curriculum in another state around the country. And I think I just realized there's just so much more work to do here. Like, this is a really sort of meaty and interesting topic. So that was part of the genesis of it. But I think for me personally, and as I think about this project and I keep working about it over time, I think for me it's really kind of a love letter to where I'm from. I keep getting funded to do like 3 or 4 more traditions, but I end up doing 20 more instead. I sort of got addicted to doing this. And I think for me, it's really because I just love this work and I love this place, and I'm excited to make something for this region that I think is authentic and empowering, and is really intended for the region. So much of the media about Appalachia tends to be very negative and extractive, and for audiences that are not here. And so I wanted to create a counterpoint to that, something that's very celebratory.
Sure.
And so I think as time has gone on, that's become clear to me that that's what keeps pushing me to do more and more of this work.
Yeah. Could you give us just a thumbnail sketch of the project?
Yeah, sure. So it's called the Mountain Traditions Project. And over the last 10 years now, but sort of here, there, and in bursts, I've been documenting, I think I'm up to almost 50 different tradition bearers. And so these are different individuals that are carrying forward Appalachian traditions. And for each one of them, I'm really asking them, what is it you do? Why do you do what you do? Why are you passionate about this? But really the critical questions come in, how is this changing? What all these ways that this region is changing, how is that informing your tradition? How is it changing? And back to the question, what do we hold on to? What do we let go? How do we see this as dynamic while also holding on to the deeper history on this?
Sure.
And then finally, how do we share this? Is this a tradition that maybe we'll phase out, or how do we make it relevant to a new generation so that this lives on? So we've had 50 different individuals now and documented them with long interviews, about an hour to sometimes 3-hour interviews, photographs for each one of them, videos for about 10 of them. We had some students come on to help make videos this past year, a podcast series that's coming out next week, actually. So cool. Very, very soon. Prints that will be going up in the gallery here in Cumberland, and hopefully a book down the road too. So it's kind of living out into a lot of different media over time as well.
Interesting. And I also read that each portrait has an essay, about 1,000 to 1,200 word essay. Did you write those yourself, or did you have, how did that evolve?
Yeah, that was actually a product of COVID. And I had known that I was going to take those interviews and do something with them. But when the world shut down last year and I wasn't able to go out and do any more work, I had all these interviews that I had recorded. And like I said, some of them were up to 3 hours. And I re-listened through all of them and just really tried to find what was at the heart of each one of these things and reduce them down to, like you said, sort of a sort of a short essay,
Right.
I guess you call it, or a long caption. And for each one of these, my goal has really been to let their words stand and speak. But I've also kind of contextualized it sometimes, telling a bit about the story of how we met, or if I connect with this person and I know them, how our connection has informed the project
Sure.
as well. And for me, I think it's really important that these statements and the photos go together, right? Because that's part of the project, is what was inside of them as well as what we're seeing in the image.
Sure. Interesting. One thing I picked up after browsing the images on your site was in reading some of the words you put about the project was identity. I think is a key area you focus on with a lot of this work. And as you point out, I think we're struggling in this area to try to find our identity. We were supported for several decades by a manufacturing base that supported the middle class lifestyle. That's kind of, for a lot of reasons now, no longer the case. And I think we're struggling to try to find our identity going forward. And what does it look like in Appalachia in the 21st century? To live in Appalachia. Was that always something in the back of your mind as you approach these subjects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as I talk to people and I was out there, I found people in a place that's really engulfed in change. I mean, all of these folks talked about how things are different than they used to be, and less certain and less secure. And economics and a changing population and changing connections have driven that. But I think on the other hand, and I'm not a folklorist, so I can't say this is academically true, but anecdotally, I also talking to people that were really embracing their heritage more than ever before, and really seeing themselves, now that there's been more attention on the region, really seeing themselves in that light and seeing that we've got something incredible to offer, here in so many different ways.
Sure.
Not least of which these traditions and life ways, but also all the other amazing things that this region has.
Sure.
And I'll say here too, I think for me, as I was drawing the circle around what we were going to document, it was really important to me that we were documenting what you would think of as the classic kind of Appalachian traditions, things like banjo and quilting, but we also were doing folk traditions and life ways as well. So we have things like hunting, for example, and fishing or kayaking, which is more of a sport, that it felt really important to me to have that be included as
Sure.
well. If for nothing else, to just, again, expand that circle of who's part of this conversation. And ultimately, I think everybody is.
Sure.
It's more than just these 60 individuals, but by broadening that definition, we hopefully achieve some of that goal.
Sure. How did you initially come into contact with some of these folks? Were they referred to you when people heard that you were doing this kind of project, or did you know them beforehand? And how did that shake out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I teach documentary photography and filmmaking, and one of the things we always talk about is access. How do you get access? How do you get trust? How do you, allow somebody to come and spend a day with you, or be vulnerable in front of you in an interview or with photos? And one of the things that's wonderful about working and where you're from is that it's already built in. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of these people that I'm documenting here, I may not know them, but I'm only one or two steps removed. And so that was a really enjoyable part of this project for me, is I'd sort of put out an open call to folks. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes on Facebook, I'd write friends, or I'd email people, and they would usually know somebody who would know somebody, and somebody I maybe not met before, but we've got this kind of shared connection. That was a great in to be able to build that trust,
Mm-hmm.
up front. So some of these folks I do know, and some of them I just met, but one of the things that's really cool about doing this work is after you've got to spend a day with them and really, get to know who they are, you feel like you've got a bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
And I've been excited to kind of keep that connection going.
Sure.
and get to know some of these folks and hope that that'll stay.
Yeah.
And it'll stick.
We kind of have a bit of a reputation for being insular, and sometimes being careful about protective of some of our stuff from outsiders. I guess I'm curious, how did you find, were people receptive when you approached them, and were they anxious to share what they did with you?
There was some anxiety, but I believe it's justifiable.
Sure.
To be perfectly honest, it's, when you're inviting someone in to share your story with them, or that you really have to hope and see that they're on the same page that you are. That they're not going to take that and use that for their own ends.
Yep.
And also you're also giving up a fair amount of your time. Sure. And inviting someone into your space. And so For me, really, what's at the core of doing this work is showing that you and I have something in common, and what I really want to do is find your story and elevate that and
Yeah.
share that. It's the sort of celebratory, that shared sense of celebration that kind of allows the work to happen.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd imagine once you establish that trust, it's important. Once they trust you, it's probably, I'm assuming that's key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's what the middle of this work, for sure.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, not only you're not going to get the invite, but it shows up in the photos. I mean, you can see in photos when somebody is really available and when they're not, and it definitely shows up in the content that you're getting from the interview.
Sure.
So that skill set and building that trust is really what's at the core of doing this work.
Yeah. Have you got any feedback since it's been out a little bit now on your website about any of the folks with, good or bad, whether they like the profile?
Yeah. Well, it's the work is just now coming out, so a lot of it hasn't been seen yet,
Sure.
And most of the folks haven't seen their photos. But the ones that have, I think it's been overwhelmingly positive.
Great.
And I think, for a lot of them, this might be the first and only time that they're having a photographer come around to do kind of a pro photo shoot.
Yeah.
And hopefully when they see what's written up about them, they again feel proud about it and feel like that's something that accurately represents who they are and what they want to have say. And also for all of my work that I do, and especially for here, I want to make sure that it comes back to the place, as I had mentioned before. So my funders and I put aside a budget to give prints back to everyone as a thank you. And part of that is just making sure that this isn't just about taking away. We're not taking these stories and taking them somewhere to make money on them or be exploitive about it, to say, oh, look at these poor folks in Appalachia, that this work is meant for the people here to see themselves in a light that's empowering, and the work comes back here. It gets galleried here, it gets heard here, it gets seen here, it gets talked about here as well. And if it's interesting to a global audience, that's great. I would love this to be, loved in London or in Tokyo, but it's meant for here.
Sure. I was curious, I was actually talking to a board member about your project, and one of the questions they had were, how many of these folks actually, how much of the work was passed down from prior generation versus how much was it something they had developed on their own? It was a first generation thing. Did you have any sense of that when you were talking to these folks?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So some of these folks are, eighth generation folks from the region, and it has been passed down either through family lineage or through masters that have taught them, and they kind of really come from that old school, deeply built-in sort of sense of tradition.
Sure.
And that a certain subset, I'm not sure what of the project, maybe a third roughly kind of come from that. But then we have another third that are not from here at all, and maybe didn't learn until their 30s or 40s or whatever. But that also really fascinates me. What would call somebody to come here, and what would get them interested in picking up this tradition and carrying it forward, and how did their differences and their different perspectives inform upon this tradition? And I think for me, the interest in kind of expanding it in that way is born out of this sense that culture is just not static, right? It's a dynamic thing. It's always been a dynamic thing. I mean, this region was actually a region of some great cultural mixing. I mean, there was folks from Scotland and Ireland and Germany and West African traditions that mixed here and also got isolated here because we were at the frontier,
Sure.
And still in many ways we are considered to be at the very edge.
Right.
These things were always changing and they were always evolving. And so this sort of insider-outsider perspective I thought was really interesting. And also with ages too. We've got some folks, I think the oldest fellow was over 100 years old, and could speak to that in a whole lifetime of watching this change. And then we've got some kids, that are also talking about how this lives in them and what it's like for a little kid to be doing it. And so for me, that breadth of perspective on tradition was really important to get in the project.
Great. I think you said you've done about 50 portraits so far, possibly expanding 60 or maybe 80 at some point. This is a mammoth amount of work, I'm sure. I'm just curious, how much time did each one take from kind of start to finish to put together?
Yeah, that's hard to say. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
A lot of this work is in what we call in filmmaking pre-production.
Sure.
So finding the people, reaching out them, having a long conversation on the phone so they sort of realize what your intentions are. then finding the time to go meet with him, traveling to get there, getting all the gear set up, all of that, you're not even shooting yet, right? And
Right.
all of that, you've already spent hours
Sure.
per person. And then of course, maybe 3 hours per person when you're there. And then on the back end, you re-listen to all that audio that you recorded. It'd be hard for me to say when you break it all down to individual, which one it is, how much time it is, but boy, easily a week per person of work, I would say.
I can imagine.
Probably. So, and again, that's not what we were funded to do, but that was never really a problem for me.
Sure.
Again, this is something that it felt like the right thing to do outside of whether or not it's, we have the full funding to do it, even though our funders have been very generous. We have some amazing partners on this that have operated sometimes with funding and sometimes in kind to get this done. But no, in a lot of ways, I think it's really been a labor of love.
Yeah.
That I've taken sort of other areas that I'm earning more money and kind of, shoehorn it in to be able to make this happen. But and part of it is just a joy too. I mean, kind of selfishly, whenever you tell these stories and you go around and each one of these 50 people that I met, it represents a different little adventure, and for a day you get to go into their world that you have no business going into otherwise and find out about these traditions, which are just fascinating, and these spaces that are fascinating, these people that are fascinating. You just get to listen. So part of it is just, for me, it's just the joy of doing the work and the joy of getting to know these people.
Great. You mentioned your partners. Talk a little bit about how the project was funded and all the people. I'm sure this was a very collaborative effort and took a lot of time and energy trying to raise the funds to put it on. Talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to your question before about sort of how I identify with my work. I think maybe if I saw myself as an artist, then I would look at this as an individual pursuit. I'm making something. But I don't look at it that way. I mean, maybe there's some artistry in it, but for me, it's in service of a greater social and environmental good. And I think the only way to do that is to build great partnerships with the people in the places that you're working.
Sure.
And this project is no exception. When it started out, it was a partnership with the Appalachian Independent newspaper, which is a local newspaper organization, Mountain City Traditional Arts, which is preserving Appalachian traditions in the region. It's got a storefront as well. Frostburg State University, the Allegany Arts Council was an early partner as well. And as time has gone on, the list has sort of expanded from there. We worked with West Virginia Public Radio. We've got a magazine piece coming out with Bitter Southerner coming up, and I'm always looking for more people to bring in the fold.
Sure.
In my mind, the more inclusive we can be, and the more we can share credit, and the more they can feel ownership in this, then the more that the work can get out there and do its work.
Right.
So I always want to think big as tent as possible when I do this.
You talked a little bit about the future plans for the project after the portraits are complete. You talked about a podcast and potentially a documentary film. Would that film kind of focus on the portraits you've already completed, or do you have a kind of a separate idea for how that would unfold?
Well, let me just wind back because I forgot one critical piece on the funding there. Our primary funder, and I think I said this in the very beginning, but I want to say it now, was the Community Trust Foundation.
Yes.
And that they gave us a second grant after we had found out about these millions of views that we got, and that really enabled this project to move forward to have the sort of scope that it has now.
Awesome.
So that was the critical piece.
Yeah.
And we've sort of built everything else around. But yeah, to answer your question about the documentary films you're asking about, so I did a number of films on this, and short little pieces, 5 to 10 minutes each, back when the project first got started. In the second round of funding, I trained some students from Frostburg State University to come in and do those films, and I think they each made 2, and then I had a filmmaker friend that made another one. I'd certainly love to do more. I could imagine this as a serial piece with PBS, for example. I think it'd be a great fit. But filmmaking is a bit of a bear financially to manage, and so that would be the next round. But I think once this work gets out there, and if there's interest for it and demand for it, then hopefully we could move it in and get that done.
Awesome. Okay, you're also discussing a podcast series you're, I think, premiering next week. Give us an idea of your vision for that element of this project.
Yeah, so for all the projects that I make, I think it's really important that we don't just make one kind of media. We make what I typically call an ecosystem of media. So rather than just photographs and a written component, you might also have videos. You'd have a podcast. you might have a series like a public-facing series where people come out and they hear people talk about.
Sure.
And part of the reason for doing that is if you want to reach a broad swath of your audience, then you've got to find a way to, one, tell stories differently. Not everyone hears the same kind of story and the same kind of angle, but also two, use different kinds of media because different people engage differently. And so for this project, radio is still something that a great variety of people listen to. And so we felt it was really important to make a podcast series to go along with the project. And I happen to be very lucky that I have got a childhood friend named Leah Scarpelli, who's from here as well, which was important to me, that the other people involved in making this have got a connection to the region. Sure. But she worked for NPR for a number of years. She's based in Texas now and really just a fantastic audio journalist. And so she came on and actually went to site with me for a few of these shoots and did the recording, but then also took the audio from all of these different traditions and sort of picked out 10 that we're releasing this coming week. Awesome. And that should be you can find that on all the different platforms you can get podcasts. But Inside Appalachia, which is West Virginia Public Radio, also ran three of the episodes so far.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's a good segue. You agreed to do a sneak peek of some of your images here. We're going to throw up on screen and give us kind of a little background and some history on that portrait. The first one we have up here, I believe, is a woman in Garrett County collecting ramps, which go ahead and you want to tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so this is Caroline Blizzard. And, one of the things about when you document ramps is they, either they blindfold you when they take you to the ramp patch, or they really convince you shouldn't be telling other people where this ramp patch is. And this is kind of it's sort of part of the tradition. People have their own spaces, and the knowledge of where those things are gets passed down from person to person and group to group. And part of the reason is that so these things don't get over harvested, essentially. So you
Sure.
protect the resource. So Carolyn, and she went for the latter. She entrusted us that we wouldn't say where this is, but we met up with her it's in Garrett County. I'll say that much. In the far western end of Maryland. I went out on this beautiful spring morning to shoot this. And one of the things that's so interesting about ramps is they exist for just this really short period of time. Like one of the first things that comes up out of the ground. They're native to this area, but for this brief period of time, the forest floor just goes flush with green, and they only grow in a very specific area and climate, but where they do grow, they just go off. Wow. So we sort of rounded the corner and we came across this ramp patch, and you can just see this sea of green everywhere. So anyway, we shot the photo and we did a video for this one as well, and got to try some ramps too, which was Have you had them before?
I have not, no.
They are spectacular. There's like oniony, garlicky, this really rich kind of taste to them. And she'd said that, for her, part of the reason that she loves this tradition so much is her grandfather. She used to go to him when she was a kid, and he would make these sandwiches with, a little bit of butter, and a little bit of ramps, and just, sort of a white bread sandwich. And she said every time that she eats them, she always thinks of him, so it sort of keeps her connected to it. But after we did the ramp collecting, we went to the ramp festival they have up in Garrett County at Deep Creek Lake, and people come in from all over, and they just cook ramps every way under the sun. There was ramp ice cream, there was ramps wrapped in bacon, there were all sort of baked ramps as a ramp jelly, and it was just amazing to see all the different ways that this is being used, and also how different kinds of cuisine is coming in, and it's sort of there's a fusion thing happening. Sure. That I think is really exciting too about this.
It's really cool because I live an hour from there probably, and I never even realized that was even a thing. So talk about raising awareness to some traditions we have here. That was really cool to see. I actually caught a clip of that on YouTube. I think it was Inside Appalachia series. Maybe profiled that. That was really interesting. Cool. So the next one we have here looks like a woman tuning a dulcimer. So tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, this is Amy Lowe, and she's on her porch in Frostburg, Maryland. And Amy grew up in Kentucky, I believe. And she said that when she was a kid, one of her strongest memories was sitting out on the porch, and people would come over, and her parents would come over, and they would get together and make music. It was just sort of what people did, and that's why she carries it on. But she played a few songs for me while I was there, and one of the things I noticed that these are these traditional ballads are often really sad tunes.
Yeah.
And she said, that's because life out here was hard, and it still is hard, for a lot of people. And so the music reflects that, but in her mind, part of getting through that is sharing that hardship together, you
Sure.
know. And I asked her if she's going to be passing this tradition down. She said, yeah, that she's teaching her son. But one of the things, that was interesting for her is because these hollers are not isolated anymore, and because her son and her too, is listening to other kinds of music as well, is that it's necessarily changing. Like it's just not going to be the way that it was. But she said for her, it's going to change. It's always changed. But the music itself will never go away because people need that sense of community.
Sure.
They need that ability to share their stories about what was great in life and what was hard in life.
Sure.
Sometimes. So it's so that it's always going to live.
Sure. The next one here we have is another music theme one. I actually caught the clip of this on YouTube as well. This is interesting. This is a father and a daughter playing music. I believe it's in Hampshire County. So tell us a little bit more about this one.
Yeah, so this is Hampshire County, West Virginia, and this is Pete and Dakota. And I was saying to you earlier about one of the joys of doing this work is just getting to find yourself in these little worlds that you wouldn't have made it into otherwise. And this one qualifies as just one of the coolest experiences I had working on this project. And this is a place called the Cabin, which is sort of a you find out through a network of friends that it exists, but it's this old cabin set out way out there in the county. And whenever I got the directions to go there, because there's essentially no internet connection out there, there's no cellular data, it's written down on a napkin. So I was driving through the night to get out there, and you come across this cabin. It's kind of in a field out there in the woods, and there was like 15 trucks surrounding it. And it's this old one room building. That's the building that's behind him there. And every so often, folks from the region get together and they just have an all-night jam, essentially, to old-time music. And I mean, it was really wild and transformative being in there. I mean, I think it was 13 people. Wow. the night that I went in this tiny kind of one room building, and the whole place was just moving and swaying, and everyone's into it, and the songs would last for 15 minutes at a time. I mean, it was really powerful and really cool, and you can see why people would have wanted to have made music this way.
Sure.
And when I asked them about it, they said for them, that's the most powerful part is, you might have people that come to the cabin to play music, or maybe traditionally would come to your porch or come to your farm that you disagreed with. Maybe you had a disagreement with them recently. Maybe politically you didn't see eye to eye, or you came from a different church. But when you got together to make music, that's what mattered. Yeah. It was a common space and a common understanding. And that's what they love about this tradition today, and wish that something we had more of. We had more of these touchstones that even if we have differences, we can find something we can do together that we love, and we melt into that.
Yeah, for sure. I think music is a universal language for sure. The next one here is a logger. One of the things I love about this is I can see that this cigarette in his hand. It feels like you're just kind of dropping on this guy in the middle of his workday. Give us the backstory here.
Yeah, so this is Guy Beitzel, and this is one of the furthest out that I went for any of the shoots that I've done. This is out in a place called 100, West Virginia. And I met him at the Napa Auto Parts there, and then after driving for hours to get out there, and then we drove for another hour to get out to the timber track. So we're way out there on this really gorgeous piece of land, and he took me all the way down into this valley where they're cutting down trees, and his father, who's he said is about 70 years old, was down there working with him, and I asked Guy how he got started doing this, and he said when he was 12 years old, he started working in his grandfather's sawmill, but his dad had really sort of dissuaded him from doing it. I believe, if I remember correctly, he said that his dad's grandfather had died in a sawmill, because this is an incredibly dangerous line of work. It's maybe a bit less dangerous today than what it was, but still, being a logger is that's
Sure.
Not only hard work, but it comes with a fair amount of personal danger as well. But he said he just couldn't stay away from it. It's in his blood, and there's something maybe fundamentally American about the notion that if you work hard on this and you go out and you bust your hump every day and you show up, you're going to make money, and if you slack off, you won't. And so it's proportional to
Sure.
Your input. And so he said that motivated him a lot. And the other thing is, if we timber right, and we have just an incredible resource in this area for hardwoods. if you timber right, this is a resource you can preserve for generations. And so for him as a small scale logger, one of the things he was really proud of is they don't just come in and clear cut. They don't do what the big companies will do. They'll come in, work with the person that owns the property and say, okay, if we take this here and take this there and you let this grow back, this can help pay off your property taxes for the next, 100 years or so. And so I really admired his outlook on how, we can use our resources that we have here, but do it in a way that is really thinking about future generations.
Fascinating. We just have two more here we're gonna share. This one appears to be a man in camouflage doing some kind of hunting. Give us a backstory on this one.
Yeah, this is Michael Sawyers, and he's a hunter, as you can see. And this is a winter day. This is an evening in November, I believe. And he took us out. This is in Allegany County, here in Maryland, and actually just south of Cumberland. I mean, it looks like the kind of wildest space here, but we're not that far from one of the biggest towns in the region. And Michael also learned from his dad. He said that when he was about 12 or so, he started hunting. And he said one of the things that he really got from his dad is the sort of need to do this right, is that you've got to have respect for the animals, you've got to have respect for the natural environment. And if you take care of the resource, you just value it that much more.
Sure.
So there's something almost sacred that's entrusted to hunters, that even though they're harvesting from the land, right, they're dependent on the land as well. So there's kind of a give and take there that he talked a lot about. But I think one of the things for me that really stood out about the experience of being out there with him is how intense hunting can be in terms of the focus. We're just talking about calling in turkeys or calling in geese or waiting patiently for hours for the deer to come by. But at the same time, just the enormous amount of beauty that you're experiencing when we're out there. And I remember him and I, we were just sitting there once, just sort of, watching the sun go down. We turned, and this beautiful eagle just came in and swooped down over the river and was probably fishing as well. And I think that's one of the things that's really cool about the tradition of hunting, is that when you're out there for that long, you're just a part of so much natural beauty. That's a essential part of this area.
Yeah, I think Mike also wrote a column about hunting for the paper for a long time.
He did, yeah.
Times News.
He's a long-term journalist from here.
Yeah. And the final one here was one of the ones I believe we unveiled at the Frostburg Arts Walk yesterday. This is a butcher in the midst of his work. So give us the backstory here.
Yeah, this is Pete Pacelli, and Pete owns a shop called The Farmer's Daughter, which is in Cape and Bridge, West Virginia. And when I went into his shop, I sort of looked down at the cabinet there filled with all the different things they had for sale, and I was like, I don't think I've seen anything that looks like this in this region. I mean, probably maybe once or twice when I was a kid. Probably the only other place I've seen something that looks like this is in a deli in New York. And he was like, yeah, like surprisingly, even though butcher shops would have been on every main street in Appalachia, that they're basically gone now. But this is the way that it was always done. And instead it's been replaced by, large box meat stores, essentially. And he said, bringing this tradition back, people said you couldn't do it, because there's no way you could compete with the price point that these large stores were going to sell at. But he said, you know what? I just think that gives Appalachia a bum rap. Once we showed people that when you take care of the animals, and these animals are raised here and they're in the pasture for their whole life, that the meat itself is the selling point. That people taste this and they experience and they know quality, essentially. So he said, we're living proof that you can do this. And they're what's called a whole animal butchery. So they use everything that the animal has to offer. And he said, for me, like part of the tradition, part of the reason why this is an Appalachian tradition is that it's sort of the waste not, want not kind of mentality. There's something Appalachian about making sure that you get a use out of everything that you have, essentially. But he did say, this is a hard craft. It's the sort of thing you need to be physically tough to do. You're working with your hands every day. You're lifting heavy things every day. And as a photographer, I was just so taken by the sort of, the visceral space that he was in. There was the blood, and you've got the hog's head there, and of course the big American flag in the background just kind of sold the whole picture for me. But I mean, really, just an amazing space and somebody that's really dedicated to their craft.
Fascinating stuff. Well, thank you for sharing those with us. These are just 6 of the images and portraits you'll see on display at the Arts Council, again, June 2nd through 13th in our Seville Gallery. I'm getting the card that we're almost up on an hour, so we'll start to wind down here. Just have one or two more questions for you as we conclude. We touched on it a little bit earlier. Given some of the challenges the area is facing, I won't make a list of them. We've all heard them a million times before. What role do you see art and specifically your project playing, and maybe trying to discuss and address some of the issues and kind of bring a new perspective on Appalachia?
Yeah. I think we've got to be honest about this region. And the truth is we've faced some very real challenges, and we've always faced some, the hardships here. And I think those things are real. And if we shy away from that, we're doing ourselves a disservice, if we try to paint an overly glossy picture. But, at the same time, that's a story that I think the broader media, the way that people from the outside look at this area, that they've shared over and over again, where we've kind of accepted, that on its own terms. But I think that the reality is there's an enormous amount that's going on here that is incredibly culturally rich. There's a number of things that are going on here that I really see a lot of the people that I was documenting, not as just tradition bearers, but entrepreneurs and free thinkers and people that are doing really radical, interesting things. And I think those stories are so important to share because how we see ourselves counts, and so if we see ourselves as being downtrodden and hard luck, then we live into that space. But if we understand ourselves as the people that have beautiful land and beautiful traditions and something to offer, I think that counts. I think that helps us live into that space, that sense of celebration and authenticity, and that we're in this together, essentially. I think that counts. At the end of the day, we still have hard questions to ask in this area about what's our economic identity going to be. And I think those are hard questions, and I don't have an answer to that. But I think the only way to do that is to simultaneously reach back and ask ourselves what our values are. What does the past tell us? What do our ancestors tell us about what this place is? And at the same time, take a step forward and say, what are the opportunities out there? What else can we learn from the outside world? How can we take in new ideas and new technology and new people? And all of these traditions are doing that. I mean, in each one of these traditions, there are new things that are coming in, and they're richer for it. And I think that's the false dichotomy that this project really wants to explode. Is this notion that we can't do both, that we can't hold on traditions but also move forward. So I think somehow the answer has got to lie in that.
Right. Great. My last question here, and before we jump into it, I wanted to just put up a quote that I grabbed of yours I thought was really interesting from a piece you'd written about this project. It says, while much of the media about Appalachia has been largely negative and extractive, I wanted to create a document that is celebratory, authentic, empowering, and interesting both to local and national audiences. So that's some things you were just talking about. And my final question is, someone comes into the Arts Council or anywhere else, sees your exhibit, what's the one thing you want folks to walk out with? What give us the one takeaway you want folks to take from the project?
Well, I don't know if I can narrow it down to one thing, but if I had to name it, it would be coming out with more questions. You know what I mean? It would be, you come in there and you see this, not just one tradition, but you see 50 different traditions, and you wonder, well, what else isn't there that I know about in this region that I could find out more about? And so my hope is that this is a waypointer for people to get more involved with the region. Or maybe it's to ask myself, well, this looks fascinating. Why haven't I been doing this? I didn't even know this existed. I didn't know ramps were here. How can I go have a conversation with somebody regionally so I can get involved with this? So my hope is that I hope the pictures are beautiful, and I hope that they're interesting, but I don't just want them to be entertainment. I want them to be a conversation starter. I want them to be a question starter for people. And ultimately, I want them to lead to people engaging with this more, engaging with this conversation more about how we hold on and move forward at the same time. So that's what I hope people leave with. I hope they step outside of the gallery and they take the next steps to get involved.
Great. Well, that's the end of my questions. I want to give you the opportunity. If people want to find out about you or your work online, where should they go?
Yeah, great. Well, if you go to michaelosnyder.com, that's my website, and you can see this project there, as well as a host of other projects Instagram is Michael O. Snyder as well. That's my handles. And that's probably the best ways to find about my work. But if you go to those sites, I almost always tag my partners as well, too, which are just a critical component to getting this work done. So if you go to those sites, too, be sure to follow on. And you can find out more about the people that I'm showcasing in these projects that are really doing the work on the ground. So I would encourage you to keep clicking forward and to see what they're up to as well.
Fantastic. Well, I just have a few housekeeping things if you wouldn't mind hanging tight. We'll address those and then we can conclude. I just want to remind everybody that, again, Michael's portraits will be on display at the Alleghany Arts Council June 2nd through June 13th. It's a limited exhibit, so make sure you mark your calendars to come out and see it. It's not going to be a month long. It's a 10, 11-day time frame. Really going to be exciting. We hope you come out and see us. In addition, we're going to have some of Michael's films on display in the back of our gallery. His Inside Appalachia documentary series will be featured, so please check that out while you're there. And we're also going to have, hopefully, or fingers crossed, our first public opening for this. It'll be a live event June 5th from 6 to 8 p.m. That's also at the Alleghany Arts Council. You come out, meet Mike, explore the work, talk about the work with him. It's really a great opportunity. And I encourage you, when you do come out, please ask one of the staff or a board member about the benefits of membership at the Arts Council. We do a lot in the community. We love to talk to people about what we can offer. So we encourage you to come out and interact with us. I should say also, the plan is right now to have the live in-person gathering. We're going to monitor the COVID-19 protocols. So please check out the Arts Council on all our social media platforms online, on our website to see any updates about that event. Finally, I'd like to thank Ryan Brenneman and Alleghany Media for putting this on, Julie Westerndorf, for the Arts Council Executive Director, for all their hard work. As we all know, this stuff takes a lot of planning and preparation. We want to thank them for all their work. And finally, I want to thank Michael for his time today joining us. I think it was really a great discussion. I really enjoyed it myself.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Great. And so with that, we'll conclude, and we hope to see you all soon. Take care.